from Toronto a few weeks ago, and now Bonnie and Brian are here visiting us. I can't believe it. You guys are here for the NoFAS
For the summit meeting,
affiliates
the
meeting.
annual affiliates meeting
Mhm.
here in DC. And last year, they awarded us the leadership award for the 25th anniversary. So this year, we're just working stiffs. Yeah.
So, and you're here to, collaborate with all the folks from all the affiliates. Will the folks from the UK be here too?
I doubt if the Australians or the UK affiliate would be here. It's a long distance for them to come, certainly, but we're expecting people from California, from the Carolinas, from Ohio, from wherever you can think of, from Georgia, and the Dakotas. They're a pretty active group, and it's great to compare notes with them.
Mm. So tell us a little bit about the NoFAS affiliates in general. What's that all about? I was on the board of NoFAS for about 11 years, and during that time they started to develop the whole affiliate concept with different groups like MoFAS, I think being the first, the Minnesota
Right.
organization on FAS. And then other affiliates in other states. Not all of them go by the NoFAS, logo, but and you're FASworld, you're
That's right.
FASworld,
That's right.
and then you have FASworld Toronto.
FASworld Toronto is our support group, and it runs virtually independently from FASworld Canada. And FASworld is basically an international organization, and we connect with people all around the globe. So what we do when we come to the summit group, we're just exchanging ideas with the groups who are mostly state-sponsored, because they do get some funding from each state. A lot of them are affiliated with universities. I'm thinking of New Mexico and different places like that. So you get a very interesting combination of organizations that are working together, sharing their expertise, sharing their ideas and what they're doing, including how to raise money in their own locality. So when they come to Washington for this summit meeting, it gives them a chance also to see who their representatives are, if their representatives happen to be in town at the time. So it's a great combination. Not so much for us. We're the only foreign affiliate that seems to come on a regular basis. We're the only Canadian affiliate, certainly so far, but there could be others. There could be others in the future. So we look forward to that too.
That's great. And Bonnie, you've written a book. I think, Lauren, it was the first introduction you had to fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. And yeah, and so I've been touched by reading it once again. I read it when it first came out, of course, when it was in the manuscript form. But reading it again, and a lot of the story of yours and Colette's lives, just unfolding in that, it breaks your heart.
Well, what it is that there are hundreds of adoptive parents across the U.S. and Canada.
Probably thousands.
Yeah, thousands. Who adopt a really cute little kid and say, oh, isn't this wonderful, and they're terrific. And then bingo, say they hit kindergarten and they're a menace. Then they hit grade 1 and 2 and they can't learn. And then they actually, as our daughter did, by her teens, she was using drugs, addicted to crack, impossible to have at home, and living on the street. And this happens to so many of them. And it was only when I saw something on television which had 5 young guys on it. It was a Canadian production. And I realized this is what we're dealing with. This is why our daughter is giving us so much grief, because there seemed to be nothing we could do. And we got all kinds of stupid advice from people, including one psychologist who watched the way that, you know, our family interplayed, you know, 2 daughters and Brian and I, and he sort of took us aside and he said, you know, the problem you have is that the 2 of you don't fight. When I convinced you that,
yeah.
I want you to have had a fight. Well, you know, we thought, okay, we have to do that. And then it was time that we were going to have the fight. It was about 3 days before he was going to turn up, and we were going to report on what happened at the fight. So what happens is we get into the kitchen. He's got his hair cut, and I said, one of the girls said, "You got your hair cut, Dad." And I said, "Yeah, and it's a pretty stupid looking haircut too." And of course, he just sank. Like, I'd never spoken to him that way before. And, you know, and both girls said, "How could you be so mean to Dad? That was awful." So the next time we went back to the shrink, we just said, "This is stupid. We've got to do something else here." You know, the fact that they would blame us for the fact that our daughter is being lousy and smoking dope and doing all that stuff had nothing to do with, you know, Brian and me fighting, because we never fought.
Well, you know, what I find in my practice is that a lot of the parents are the best parents on the planet to be taking care of these children if they would have been told ahead of time that the child had certain special needs, and that,
Yeah.
you know, it's somewhat about the environment, but if the environment that the child is placed in isn't accommodating their needs because it's unaware that they have certain needs, then, you know, that's where things start to fall apart. For an example, in the school system, if the parents know to advocate with the schools to give them, you know, extended time, to, you know, have smaller class sizes, to minimize the distractions around them, to, you know, give them chunks of work as opposed to, you know, huge volumes of work, just little, you know, tiny chunks, and to do more individualized work with the children. A lot of parents don't know to do that, and they think the child is just being lazy when they come home at the end of the school day, and they're tired, they're, you know, drained from having to sit still all day and manage the upset of the overstimulation of the classroom.
Exactly, the stimulation of the classroom, which we all want our children to be stimulated so they'll learn and absorb. But for our kids who are affected, it's absolutely the wrong thing. Now, I can't speak for the children's aid societies here in America, but back home in Canada, we discovered pretty early on, once we realized what this was, the trouble, the difficulty that Colette was having with her studies and with her behaviors, was fetal alcohol effect, now called ARD, alcohol-related neurodevelopmental disorder. And what the agencies who were putting children into foster care or adoptive care weren't telling the parents, because mostly they were untrained, they didn't really understand what it was all about, and they often felt if they told the parents, then they wouldn't adopt or foster the children, which was absolutely the wrong tactic to take, because a lot of parents, once they understand something, perhaps some would not go forward if they knew, but there are a whole lot who would. But they need to know, because then they know how to deal with the issues that are there. But when they're constantly being surprised, you get, in the fostering system, you get a whole lot of kids who go from one foster home to another because they don't fit in, because they don't understand, the foster parents don't understand, the other kids who are in that foster home are suffering as a result, and you get a child who goes into 10, 15, as many as 20 foster homes, and that child is totally damaged to the nth degree, and they don't believe that anybody could ever love them or appreciate them or understand them, because nobody told the parents what it was all about. And we have to do that. But before that, of course, we have to prevent it from happening in the first place. So we've got two levels of issues here, looking after the kids who are affected and also creating that awareness and understanding among young women of that fertile age where they can have babies and their partners. I mean, it's not just the women, we've got to tell the partners as well.
Right. And that's where, you know, we believe that we begin at the stage of sexual activity when they're, you know, becoming, you know, of that age and sexually active. We need to start telling them to either avoid alcohol or avoid pregnancy. So in our way, we use the condom campaign to teach people, just like with HIV prevention, you prevent sexually transmitted diseases using condoms. We believe that you prevent ND-PAE, the new term for, you know, FASD really, neurodevelopmental disorder associated with prenatal alcohol exposure. It occurs as early as the 3rd week post-conception.
Sure.
So for women who don't know they're pregnant, you know, and then they stop when they find out they're pregnant, a lot of damage has already been done. And so much of our advocacy efforts and so much of our prevention efforts focuses on the pregnant woman, even the label on the bottle.
Well, doctors keep telling us, both American and Canadian doctors keep telling us that 50% of pregnancies are unplanned, which I find hard to really understand, because we know how pregnancies happen. So when I'm talking to high school students, after I've explained what FASD and ARND, all of these things are all about, the history and what the problems are, the manifestations that they're going to experience when they see this happening in real life, I tell them, you know, you don't stop drinking when you realize you're pregnant. You stop drinking when you're planning a pregnancy. And of course, then I have to ask the question, what does it mean to plan a pregnancy? And after some humming and hawing and saying, you know, the man and woman talk about having a baby and so on, what I want to get across is the fact that if you're sexually active and not using contraception, you're planning a pregnancy. After the eye rolling was over and so on, they start to acknowledge, you know, I never thought of it that way before. But unless that point gets through, these young women are going to be having babies that are going to be damaged, brains traumatized by alcohol to a lesser or a greater extent, depending, you know, they might have just had one binge evening or they might have just had the occasional drink. You know, it's the awful thing that I've learned recently is that it's well-educated women who are in relatively affluent families are doing most of the drinking and more serious happening. And in those families, whether the children get hidden or not diagnosed or just get tutors, I don't know what it is, but we know that the incidence, the prevalence rate has got to be so much higher than the official rate.
Well, you know, that's so true because even, you know, it's a worldwide problem.
Yeah.
I have a patient that I've recently started to see who's adopted from Korea, from a very affluent family. But the baby was given up for adoption because it was out of wedlock. And the mother had drank because she was a teenager and she had, you know, she was in her late teens. She had access to alcohol because her parents had money. And just like in this country, a lot of the young women start their drinking behaviors in high school. And, you know, they go to parties and they drink a lot. I think it was 48% of teenage girls in 9th grade are drinking. Sydney had shown those statistics up in Toronto at the APA, around 48% of 9th graders. And then by the time they get to be in college, you know, that 13.5% of college women binge drink. And like Sydney was saying, it's nothing for, you know, college women to have maybe 12 drinks, you know, over the course of an evening. And she said sometimes 12 is just getting started. So then they take that beyond college. So if they get pregnant in college, maybe they have an abortion, which is, you know, really preventable by using effective contraception. I mean, it's not like we're in the dark ages in this 50s or 60s before a lot of contraceptives were available. Then they go on and in their married lives, they're still continuing to have these binge episodes because a little bit's not enough to feel a buzz anymore.
Right.
And they and their husbands become pregnant and oops, you know, 9 weeks along, they find out they're pregnant and the baby's brain is already, you know, suffering.
And I think what the problem is that 9 weeks is with, you don't find out right away, but that early fourth to late third week is when, you know, a lot of damage can happen. But then they find out they're pregnant at 9 weeks and stop drinking. And then when their child is having problems down the road and their doctor asks them, well, did you drink during pregnancy? And no, I did not, because when I found out at 9 weeks, I stopped drinking. But I didn't, I was never asked about before recognition of pregnancy. And that's the disconnect there. And then it just perpetuates the cycle. So it's not even just binge drinking, it's really for those women who have, I mean, we have a glass of wine at dinner, you know, that's just a part, I grew up with it, it's just, you know, a glass of red wine at dinner, and you don't know you're pregnant, there's nothing bad about that, but then when you find out, if you find out so-and-so, you know, you're not planning your pregnancy, and that's where the difficulty is. It doesn't necessarily have to be college binge drinking, which does happen, definitely, but it's everywhere, you know, it's all the same, alcohol. You know?
And a lot of people don't realize that for a woman, a binge is only 4 drinks or more.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, you know, it seems to be par for the course at a party or some social event. And it's really, really disconcerting to realize that there's so much of this going on. It's still got to be considered the hidden disability because so many of our affected children look as normal as the rest of us do, but it's the brain damage and the behaviors and these kinds of things that often don't even get diagnosed until the child is much older. And so many children who end up in foster care or are adopted, quite often they don't have the history of the mother or the mother's behavior.
Right, exactly.
And a diagnosis is almost impossible. So we've got to grow and change that.
Yeah, and so here's my take on it. I do believe, like a hound dog, we need to do more detective work than currently psychiatrists feel comfortable doing. And I think sometimes going back to the original social worker that took the child out of placement. And I just attended a national roundtable discussion to develop competency standards for child welfare workers. We call them child welfare workers that actually are the ones at the front line taking the child out of the home, for them to do more kind of damage control with the families and with the adoptive parents or foster parents to teach them not just adoption competency but mental health competency and how to look for certain things in the child, but then how to bridge that gap of knowledge to the parents who are going to be taking on the child. At the same time, what we need to be doing is we need to be understanding that these issues like ADHD and like autism, and it looks a little bit like at times bipolar disorder, it looks a lot like a lot of different disorders. If they're showing up to a psychiatrist's office and they've been adopted, likely they were prenatally exposed. And again, I don't use that as, you know, the diagnostic criteria. I use it as more a red flag and a screening. So if they've made their way to my office, it's not just a simple issue like, not that it's simple, but, you know, the loss of their biological family, or an issue related to adoption itself, or just an issue like reactive attachment disorder, which I think a lot of kids who are adopted get labeled with. You know, for the most part, if they've ended up in my office and somebody's seeking medication and they're adopted, we need to look deeper. We need to look for one of these underlying other issues, like prenatal alcohol exposure, and teaching psychiatrists to be able to do that You know, that's kind of what we're up to these days. So in addition to having spoken at the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry on this issue a few times, and this year doing the Institute, we just came back from the American Psychiatric Association. You know, all of us did, right? You spoke on the panel and teaching those psychiatrists. And then going to Vienna, Austria, in the next month to speak at that International Congress on Mental Health and the Law. I think at all these levels, like you said, Brian, it's just like with autism, you know, 20 years ago, no one really understood what autism was. And these kids got marginalized and brushed under the rug and bullied and demeaned at school.
Right.
And our kids, you know, not that my biological children, that's not who I'm talking about, but the children in my practice, you know, certainly have, you know, histories of having, you know, major issues, you know, being ostracized and demeaned and, you know, bullied at school, even by teachers. You know, teachers not understanding their underlying disability. You can call it a hidden disability, but when it's in the school setting, it's obvious. And they have social skills problems. It's just, you know, sad that the people around them that are there to help don't understand it.
Well, Susan, I'm sure you know that our teachers, our social workers, our doctors, our nurses, people in the medical community, they're, not to mention the justice community,
Right.
are not being trained. They don't know, they don't understand what this is all about. Now, I think all of our kids who come from adoption and foster situations have a very deep-rooted sense of abandonment.
Yes.
Now, that you can translate that into a number of 3- and 4-letter acronyms of one kind or another. But the thing is, picking up on something that Lauren just said, that, you know, that the child who is taken because of an incompetent, a so-called incompetent parent, or a parent that just doesn't seem to have the capacity to parent effectively, could be a single mom without any real education and maybe a user of various substances and things like that. They're taken into the system. They become a ward of the state, basically. And I really think that is one of the larger mistakes we as a society are making, because we're spending a ton of money on foster care and welfare and all of these other kinds of support systems that we put into place, when we should be supporting that original mom. Because if you take her baby away, she's going to have another baby,
Right.
and another, and another. I mean, we know so many who've had 4 and 5 because nobody's going to love me except my own child. But you take that child away, she's going to make another baby.
Yeah, so, you know, I have several kids, but one in particular I'm thinking of, she and her sister both have now started to see me. Their mom had 8 children, and all from the Maryland, you know, they live in Maryland, and most of them have different dads. I look to those women and I say, okay, first of all, who would do that intentionally? You know, who would keep on having babies intentionally? You know, 8 children that none of them they're caring for. So, you know, we had learned from the women in the program I worked in before medical school. I think I shared with you about that, Grace Court. It was the women in a halfway house program called Our House. That, you know, the reason they kept having babies was, they said, because the government kept taking their babies away from them. And they couldn't equate the fact that, okay, the government's taking your babies away from you because you keep on relapsing with substances. And so then you look at, okay, maybe they have underlying cognitive issues themselves, and maybe to some extent, you know, because they were in foster care or they came from an alcoholic family, maybe they're at risk of ND-PAE too. I do believe that instead of fostering these kids out, we need to begin fostering the mothers with their 1 or 2 babies. Now, your daughter has had 2 children. The first, my understanding, her child, the first one, was prenatally exposed to
That's
alcohol,
right.
but
Yes.
not the second.
And the second one
Because,
wasn't.
because you became her social services system, you got her an apartment, you got her a place to stay off the streets. When she had her first son, she then had a place to live with her partner.
Yeah,
Right,
And then you helped her get some social services assistance in Canada.
and I became her trustee, so that.
Yeah.
And she became a guardian, you were her guardian.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, and so you were in a way her guardian angel, that's what I.
controlling. the
Yes,
income.
controlling the income, well, that's what I do for many of the children in my practice before they hit 18. I make sure the parents have it in line that they become guardian of their children. Because then, hopefully, we can prevent this cycle from happening. We can get the children, off alcohol and drugs even before that process.
Their son, who was the older of the two children, was exposed to prenatal alcohol. On the second baby, who was 2 years younger, who was Victoria, there was no money for alcohol in that house.
Because you were controlling the
Well,
money.
because the boyfriend drank it all.
Oh, he
Right.
drank it all.
Yeah,
Yeah,
So that his sperm were then affected.
well, maybe, I don't know,
Yeah.
but anyway, Mom gets pregnant again. Vicky,
Okay.
who you've met,
Yeah.
is an absolutely delightful
Yeah, she
kid
is.
with
She's
a,
lovely.
You know,
Right.
great intelligence.
Uh-huh.
our
But-
daughter's partner, whom she
Yeah.
met on the street, and we set them up together. We did everything we.
After they were already with child.
No.
No, before they were with child. That came on soon after they were in the apartment. the
Was she
first
drinking
apartment.
still?
Well, she wasn't much of a drinker. So there's something called Mike's Hard Lemonade, which is an excellent source of vodka.
Well, that's
And-
alcohol.
Yeah, of course it is, but the whole thing is it's like soda pop in a way, and that's the
But
way.
you said she wasn't much of a drinker.
She
but it
wasn't
sounds
much of it. She wasn't,
She
what
wasn't
I
a
would
heavy
call
drinker.
a heavy-duty
Yeah.
drinker by any means.
She was a light drinker.
Yeah.
It's more of a light.
And it
She didn't
was,
get wasted.
it was enough. It was enough for
And
her
it's
to
still,
have
what
an
he's saying
effect.
is it's still enough for her son to
Yeah.
have
Well, right.
previously exposed.
Yeah.
Well,
Now,
I
her-
mean, I think saying that that's light drinking is, and she's having hard liquor is.
It's not
light-
hard liquor.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
not. It's like
but-
It's
like
weak.
it's a mixed drink. It's
Yeah.
not.
Okay,
yeah.
but see, again, I think, we're gonna fist fight here.
No,
Yeah.
listen, the thing is, we couldn't control where the money was
Yeah.
going, what it was
But she
getting
was-
spent on, right?
Right.
She
but-
didn't know she was pregnant. So
Yeah, I
she's
understand
drinking
that.
along with boyfriend.
And
But
what?
is she
what-
drinking the Mike's hard liquor? Or
Yeah,
Yeah,
whatever it was?
She would,
The Mike's-
like, it was their treat to go out on a Friday night and get a dinner of fish and chips and maybe one drink or something like that.
And what he's saying is that was still enough.
It was still enough.
Yeah.
I mean,
To
she
make
wasn't a
damage.
binge drinker.
Right, and that is still, which is what I was saying earlier, that it's not
Yeah.
just the binge drinking, it's people who have one glass or one drink a night with dinner, and
Yeah.
it's still a problem, it still causes damage, that's what he's trying to.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Get across.
and yet, I think, like Kathy Sulik would say, okay, that's
Yeah.
one of my mentors, she would caution against speaking in such vague ways about prenatal alcohol. She would say if it's just one drink occasionally, we can't say, for sure. We can say that at least for your daughter, it did enough harm to her child, and maybe because she herself was prenatally exposed and whatever vulnerabilities she had.
whatever
They
it was,
came
she
out.
drank.
Yeah.
We did not encourage
Of
drinking,
course,
let's put it that
no,
way.
of course that, yeah.
And and she's got a boyfriend
I
who's drunk
know,
half the
I
time.
know.
the thing is, what we say is that, yes, I would agree with Sulik up to a point,
Right.
that a drink here or there may be no damage. In many cases,
There
I
might be.
mean, we have seen situations, maybe
Yeah.
this is anecdotal,
Yeah,
but where twins have been born,
Right, I
and
know.
one is affected
Right.
and the other isn't,
That's
and we
exactly
don't
right.
understand that.
right.
But what we do know, and this is for sure,
Yeah,
that there is no lower threshold.
I know that.
We know that it's a possibility of brain damage no matter how little it is. We don't know that one drink will be okay.
Right.
We don't know that maybe 10 drinks over 10 weeks might be okay. The point is, the only safe way to go is to avoid alcohol completely
Right.
during this time from before you get pregnant.
Right.
And this is the crux of the problem. It's so hard because alcohol is such a part of our social environment nowadays. Certainly, there were earlier times when it was just a bunch of drunken guys who were using the alcohol, abusing the alcohol to a great extent. But nowadays it's very commonplace for women and their friends to go for a drink after work. We're not talking about down and out women, we're talking about well-educated women. We're talking about women who come from families that are not poor. And we're talking about the average individual. It's what we have in our cultures, and not just here in North America, but certainly the last international conference I attended, there were speakers there from different parts of Africa. There were speakers there from Russia. There were speakers from all over the States, in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and I can't remember where else. I'm not sure about Japan was there or not. But the point was, they all talked about this in such large terms. This is a pandemic, a worldwide pandemic, and it's just not being dealt with effectively.
And one of the reasons that we've talked about it's not being dealt with effectively, at least in the States, and I can't speak for Canada or anywhere else, you know, I've actually run the numbers recently, just pulling data from the internet from various different alcohol beverage associations who tout their annual revenue. And adding up the distilled liquor industry, the malt beverage industry, and the wine industry, it comes to about $227 billion a year in revenue. And they say that, oh, this helps drive the economy. And I think that's part of why our governments are so reluctant, at least the US government, I can say, so reluctant to let go of that revenue, because, you know, they do get tax from that. I believe, and I promote an ND-PAE tax, that, okay, let's go ahead and knock them down, just like the pharmaceutical industry gets highly regulated and has to pay for the regulatory body that regulates them, which is the FDA, but they have no oversight over the FDA. We need to have more oversight over big alcohol, just like we have over big tobacco and big pharma, okay? And we cannot let the alcohol beverage industry sit on the boards that are regulating them. Even though right now in our county, in Montgomery County, they allow someone, and it's by law, they have to allow someone from the Liquor Control Board, from the liquor industry, on the Liquor Control Board, as well as on the Alcohol and Other Drug Abuse Advisory Council. They have to have someone, and that person, at least in our county, who heads our prevention group for our county, is that same representative that represents the big alcohol. And that would be like having a physicians association have someone from big pharma sit on the association. We find that very unethical, and you know, we doctors have gotten big pharma out of our business. We've had to. It's unethical, we've decided. But you know, I feel like that you know, it's going to be really hard to pry alcohol out of, you know, many aspects of our government because they have such a strong lobby.
Well, this is true, and the thing is, we're never going to eliminate alcohol from social behavior. I just don't see that happening. I mean, we tried prohibition a bunch of decades ago. That didn't work out very well. So we know it's there. It's sort of a human trait, and we're not going to eliminate it. We may not even be able to diminish it in a way. But to me, a more simple route than the kinds of things that people try to do is, why don't we just take a study? And I've tried to get academics to look at this, and they say, well, give us some money and we'll do that. And I said, we don't have any money. Do it as a postdoctoral thesis or something that somebody can do or some team can do. Determine the revenues from the beverage alcohol industry and the costs of looking after the abuse of alcohol, whether it's a combination of prenatal alcohol exposure, or just the sicknesses, the accidents, the deaths, the crime, all of those things that are directly attributable to alcohol. And we know these, I'm sure the statistics are there. I'm sure we could find out without too much difficulty if we got the team ready to pull those numbers together, and we'd be able to say to our decision makers, our politicians, say, okay, this is the revenue get, but these are the costs.
Well, so I did that in my book. Actually, I pulled the revenue for the, and I didn't do it for everything, just for ND-PAE, but the revenue alone annually, as of maybe 2013, is $227 billion a year, all right, in the sales of alcohol. For all fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, okay, that's the old term, as of 2003, for fetal alcohol syndrome itself per year is about 5.4 billion.
This is in the U.S.
In the U.S., okay? 5.4 billion. Now that was 2003 figures. It was an economic analysis done by a company, I think hired by SAMHSA, okay?
Right.
But that was for fetal alcohol syndrome only. And it did not account for things like juvenile delinquency, crime, things like that are, you know, really hidden, more hidden costs. It was more the direct cost for healthcare, for, you know, education, I believe was included, you know, many of the different expenses. Now, if you take that 5.4 billion and then you say you're going to have to increase it by about 2 to 3 times that, because we know that there are 2 to 3 times as many individuals with other fetal alcohol conditions.
Right.
That, you know, now we lump them all together as ND-PAE, neurodevelopmental disorder associated with prenatal alcohol exposure. They all have brain damage. You know, we now have it under that umbrella for DSM-5. So saying 2 to 3 times that, it'd be about 27 billion a year. That's 2003 numbers. Right? So that's been 12 years.
Right.
So we're gonna have to increase that with inflation. I wouldn't be able to do that. I'm not statistically, you know, savvy like that, but 2003 data, 27 billion a year compared to 227 billion. Now does the 227 billion, does that make up for the costs of these children? And I believe not, because that's lost productivity every year of 40,000 new children being born. And if we look back to more than 40 years ago when the first babies were identified, if you say that every year since 40,000 babies have been born with this condition, think about that number. Take that number and multiply 40,000 by about 42. And I did it, and that's for, you know, my book. I think it's about 1.6 million people have now been affected since Ken Jones first identified those kids, Ken Jones and David Smith. So we've had a tremendous number of people that we could have prevented had, like with the thalidomide, had we just said, you know what, we're going to tell people how this happens, and we're going to prevent it.
Well, the thing is, revenues that go to the industry are one thing. Tax revenues that go to our governments is quite another, and not perhaps the people that I used to work with when I was in advertising who were part of the alcohol beverage industry, they would always claim, well, you know, the government takes all the money and we're hardly making any profit and so on, which, to be kind, is malarkey. And this thing is, you know, if they weren't making any money, they wouldn't stay in the business. Now the business is international. Most of the big distillers and the big breweries and so on, they're all consolidated within a few organizations, most of them being European and controlled abroad, and I think one major one is also from Japan. So the thing is, this is big deal stuff. And those people can use their influence on our politicians, and they certainly do, but we've got to expose the whole thing. And if we don't do that, there's not going to be much action. We have tried to get simple labeling on beverage alcohol packaging, and it keeps getting shot down in our parliament because they just can't get the agreement among all the people, because there are too many constituencies that have either breweries in their backyard or influences that keep them from doing that. My point is that there's no simple communication process. My background being marketing communication, you have to realize right from the get-go that there's no simple brochure, ad campaign, or any simple thing that's going to turn the tide on this. We have to attack this awareness issue on every level possible. We have to train our medical community, our educational community, our justice community from the get-go, when they are learning to be doctors and lawyers and judges and teachers and social workers. They have to learn that as part of their basic training. We have to teach the kids in high school about effective parenting, and this is part of effective parenting. Not just learning how to cook and manage a checkbook, but also about the effects that alcohol can have in their lifestyle and with their potential children. We have to tell people in every way possible, with general communication platforms, whether it's on a label, on a package, or whether it's with communication programs. And I think it's absolutely critical, as you were suggesting earlier, Susan, that it's a responsibility of the beverage alcohol industry to take this on. Not just us as individuals, as parents, not just as politicians, not just as professionals, but the industry itself. It's incumbent upon them, because they are selling a teratogen, which is going to have an impact on my brain if I drink too much. It kills people all the time because of car accidents and all kinds of other abuses with various kinds of damage. And so for them to stand back and say, well, it's up to the individual to make the choice. It's not. I mean, if we can have packaging from everything from mayonnaise to peanut butter to, I just wanted to tell you what the ingredients are, why can't we say what's on a liquor bottle, which is a neurotoxin? Why can't we have it there too?
Right.
In an effective way. You
know, that's part of my point in the article that's coming out in Dr. Nelson's book this summer. It's the ethics of FASD in adults. I talk about the consumer protection and the alcohol industry's duty to warn on this issue. Back when the Food, Drug, and Beverage Labeling Act came out, I think it was under President Clinton, it said that, for instance, if orange juice on the label says fresh squeezed, it better be fresh squeezed. And back then, I was thinking about the problem with of course, I've been thinking about this problem for 22 years, so any new law that comes out, I'm thinking how this is affecting, you know, how it could potentially affect alcohol. Now, if alcohol, because it is a food and it's considered a drug and a beverage, right? So, you know, either it needs to be regulated by the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, or it needs to have more oversight by the Food and Drug Administration, because it's both a food and a beverage. It's both seen as a beverage and a drug.
Right.
So in this article, I have brought in many different aspects of legislation like that, and legislation that essentially brought the tobacco industry under better regulation by the FDA. You know, and I think that we need to start looking at that really for alcohol for the same reasons, because people are consuming this product as though it's kind of like water or just Kool-Aid. You had mentioned the hard lemonade, you know, that your daughter was drinking. You know, they make these drinks sound so sexy. And I had a patient who has full FAS, adopted from Russia. She and her sister, who also has some degree of FASD, ND-PAE. They had gone out, you know, to a concert with their dad, their adoptive dad, and he bought them both Long Island iced teas. Well, my patient came in like the next week to tell me about what had happened after she drank her drink and half her sister's. So she'd come in and told me about how she was like beating her head against a couple of cars outside. She became very angry and agitated, and normally she's not at all like that. And she's telling me after having a couple drinks that happened. And I said to her, okay, a couple of drinks. Well, what drinks were they? And she said, well, I can't remember what was the name of it. So I named a couple of, I said, well, was it like beer, wine? Was it liquor? Was it mixed drink? Well, it was a mixed drink. I said, was it a Long Island iced tea? And she said, yes, that's what it was. And I verified that with her dad. I said, well, you didn't have just 2 drinks. Each of those drinks have 6 shots of alcohol, 6 shots. So that means you had a total of not really 12 drinks, but it was somewhere maybe around 9 drinks if she had 1.5 drinks.
And it's all different liquor.
And it's all different
Which makes it
liquors.
worse.
It's a lot of different liquors, okay? And I tell kids with, you know, ND-PAE in my practice, you've had enough already in those 9 months of development for 10 people and 10 lifetimes. You don't need any more. You've had enough. Tell your friends, no man, thanks, I've had enough already, when they ask you at a party. You know, I've had enough. You know, I'm good. But, you know, that had happened to this lady, and I'm sure it can happen to even young ladies who are out drinking and they're having a good time and they have the 1 drink, and that 1 drink is enough. You know, the alcohol industry has a duty to warn in ways that we have not held them accountable. And I think largely it's because as a society we are so intoxicated with this social drug of choice that it is our, you know, it's the one thing we're going to put up with. We can't put up with a life-saving cancer drug causing damage to babies. So therefore, physicians know to say to their patients, please use 2 contraceptives, and you're going to sign on this line that you're not going to become pregnant while you're on this life-saving cancer drug. We agree that the risk outweighs the benefits, even though the benefits are life-saving. With alcohol, to me, the benefits of this do not outweigh the risk to the unborn, or even those that are to be conceived. We need to be educating young women about this in ways that we haven't. And the alcohol industry by far has a duty to warn that it is not taking responsibility for it. So I'm glad that you're taking this on in Canada, Brian and Bonnie.
Well, taking it on is a
Doesn't
bit of
mean
a
that
dream. It's kind of a dream still at this point, because I'm not sure we're making that much progress, and we really have to work together. We need to pull together more people, more influencers, more pressure tactics, more communication. It's formed, and we've been at this since the late 90s, and we don't see a lot of attitudes changing yet.
I was just gonna say, and I may be naive, but when you were speaking before about how the alcohol industry, it generates so much revenue and it has to do more, of course, ethically it does, because the risks absolutely outweigh the benefits, but the problem is you're never gonna get the alcohol industry to just say, okay, we agree, you're right.
You need the government to do
You need
this.
the government to do it,
Yes.
because there's no way that they're just gonna be like, you know what, we will put a label saying this is dangerous, because it's the right thing to do and it's what needs to be done, so we can, so there's not gonna be one person who's just gonna change the tide. It needs to be pressure from society as a
and
whole,
there have been
government.
politicians who've tried to have warning labels put on.
In Canada.
In Canada, members of parliament who have tried, and it just gets shut down
Yeah, because
along the
it's
way
so much
because.
money, it's
yeah.
sad, it's just corrupt, because
Yeah.
it's a corporation,
Well,
it's
and-
where all the money's coming from.
And this is what's not understood, sorry for interrupting you. In the States, the legislation never passed,
Yeah.
okay? In 1981, the Surgeon General's warning, the first Surgeon General warning came out.
Yeah.
In 1988, the alcohol industry finally agreed that they would label beginning in 89. Okay, but they got to choose the label, all right? And they decided that so that the legislation wouldn't pass. It never passed, okay?
Right,
It
but they
never
still
passed
felt the
Congress.
pressure,
They
though,
felt the pressure,
is the
okay?
thing, yeah.
My thing is, the government did sue Big Tobacco,
Right.
and they
Interesting.
won. And I think it was Philip Morris that they sued. I have all that in this book chapter coming out, in Monty Nelson's book. You know, the government needs to take on alcohol, and they need to
That's
take it
true.
on in a big way, the same way they did for tobacco.
That's exactly what I
And-
think. Every time we talk about this, I always
Right.
am drawn to how,
And
what
the
changed
government
from
has a
tobacco.
duty to warn
Yeah,
the same way, but they're gonna have to take down tobacco, or take down alcohol like they
Right.
did tobacco. I think doctors need to get behind it, just like
right.
dentists got behind tooth decay, and they said, we're gonna stop patting our pockets, putting fillings in people's teeth and yanking their teeth out. We're gonna teach little kids in elementary school how to brush and floss, because their parents may not be doing that. And they did it. They started going into schools with the brushing and flossing programs. Doctors need to be going in, teaching kids and telling them as they come into their practices about what happens before you know you're pregnant. They need to begin educating young women and inoculating them, so to speak, with this knowledge when they hit puberty or right before, so that they have this information, and tell them in different ways in every setting that you possibly can. And information itself is going to illuminate, I believe. But I think it is going to take policy to change it, and it's going to take government action to change it.
Paulette has a son who is with FASD, who was 15 years old, and he's really been giving her a lot of grief. Now, here is a mom who has what I'm going to call AR&D herself, who has done incredible work with her son. I mean, she realizes what happened to her, and she feels terrible about having had a few drinks before she found out she was pregnant and damaged Kenny. And Kenny has gotten into some really bad stuff. Skipping school, fighting with people, just being a real monster, and it's been breaking her
Smoking
heart.
too much weed.
Yeah,
is
well,
part of it.
basically smoking weed. Get a call from Colette last week. Kenny has been found on the edge of a lake, freezing to death. He had been smoking up. It was a cold, cold night, and somebody found him unconscious.
They've
From
also,
smoking.
they've
Yeah.
also fed him alcohol.
Yeah,
Who
they
did?
fed him alcohol.
Who did?
Well, his
Whoever.
buddies,
Oh.
they just thought it was a big joke. And he became unconscious. They left him on a path in this
He
very
could've
large
died.
park.
Yes.
He could have been, and he was only discovered there before the evening was over by a passerby walking her dog, who called the police, and they got an ambulance. They said he was in a semi-coma state
wow.
for
He was
most
blacked
of the night.
out. He
Yes.
was blacked out.
He was
unconscious.
totally
Yeah.
out,
Where were his friends? Isn't that awful?
and his
That is
friends just
awful.
abandoned him.
That
Yeah.
is awful. That is awful.
But you know, a kid, that happened to a kid here in the States. I can't remember what state, but, and not necessarily ND-PAE, you know, the kid, but they, the friends left the kid on the doorstep, and the kid did freeze to death. And they didn't ring the bell, they didn't, you know, awaken the parents, they just left the kid on the doorstep, and the kid froze to death. It was middle of the winter. I think it was this last winter. No, I'm not kidding.
Who
And,
does that?
well,
That is awful.
kids who aren't thinking, they thought that if they, you know, rang the doorbell, the parents would understand that it was them who did it. And they figured that somebody would just come and find, but you know, teenagers do not have a prefrontal cortex that's totally connected. I mean, most of them do not have, I mean, they're just not thinking. And, you know, the kids that would do that to your grandson, I mean, I feel like more awareness needs to be raised about this issue so that people don't mistreat these individuals. But unfortunately, what happens is that gangs find that this person will be a good horse, you know, meaning the person to carry the weed into the school system, or the person to, you know, be the courier of the cocaine or the heroin. You know, they're not good at running the operation, but they'll be a good go-for. You know, they you know, they want to be part of the pack, so they're going to be doing anything that the leaders tell them to do. And they feel like they connect, you know, when they're part of a group like that. So your grandson getting part of a group like that, he probably felt like he fit in.
That's right, and this is why so many kids like this get caught by the police, because they're used by these same kinds of individuals who know how to manipulate our kids who are affected, and when they're in stores boosting whatever they can take or get out, they're the ones who get caught with the stuff.
I know.
And this is a big problem. So I guess it's not just the girls,
Yeah.
it's the boys who are impregnating the girls too. They've got to learn that they have a responsibility as well. We've got to teach the professionals in all you know, the different spheres. We've got to teach our kids from an early age. There's been, in Ontario, they have just revamped the whole sex ed curriculum. There are all kinds of parent groups who are shouting down, no, it's our job to teach kids about sex practices and everything else like that, which of course is nonsense, because most parents don't, because they're too shy, or they're not capable, or whatever the case may be. But the point is, it's a very careful program to just start out at the very junior primary levels, teaching them about terminology, teaching them about things and so on. But the misleading reports from both the religious and fanatical parent groups is making a lot of turmoil over something that could be very positive for our children. And the thing is, we need to tell, I think I spoke earlier about a much larger scale parenting curriculum, which should be mandatory, I think, because we've got to teach kids how to be responsible parents. And part of being responsible parents is the use of alcohol, is the way to manage your money, is the way to prepare foods properly, is all of these kinds of things, and how to deal with kids who have these emotional and different kinds of problems in their lives. So
we wanna
let's
hire-
get started.
We want to hire you both, and we can do a book on this, and how how we are gonna solve the problems of the world,
I know,
right?
that would be terrific if it were so simple, right?
Yeah,
But you've been at this for a lot of years. I feel like
Yeah.
I've been at this for a lot of years. You know, we need to train more young people like Lauren and Sydney and others to, you know, really carry the torch into those fields that they're
Yeah.
in. You know,
Yeah.
like you were saying, like psychology and medicine and social work. But we've so enjoyed having you, and we're gonna be off to enjoy some of the sites in the area of Georgetown and
lovely.
Old Town Alexandria, and we are so grateful to you for coming and sharing your thoughts and ideas and wisdom with us from Toronto. You guys are light years ahead of us up there in just some of what you do in the FASD prevention especially area and treatment, and you know, even the court systems you have for
yeah.
FASD are totally different than we have down here. So
Yeah.
we're grateful to you for coming. Thank you.
Well, we really appreciate the work that you guys are doing, and we're getting ideas, we're sharing ideas, and let's keep collaborating. You
We
know,
will,
it's great.
we will.
Okay.
Okay, be well. Bye.